appreciate it. Well, now I feel, yeah, good. Well, thanks. I did go to that stuff, by the way, and it was hot as hell in the corn. It was absolutely
Yes, the cornfield was very hot, very hot.
To see these people sitting out there all day long, having to do one 10-minute speech after another 10-minute speech, cut it down to 5. But maybe I'll just say a quick word about myself and then why I'm here, which is my name is Michael Bennet. I've been in the Senate for 10 years. I'm the senior senator from Colorado. Before I was in the Senate, I really wasn't in politics. I had been in business in Denver, turning around distressed companies. The last deal I did was Regal Cinemas, United Artists, and Edwards Theaters, which were 3 big theater chains that we combined to make into the world's largest movie theater chain. It no longer is the world's largest. The world's largest is now AMC, which is owned by the Chinese. But for a moment, ours was the biggest. I left there to go work for the city and county of Denver for a couple of years when John Hickenlooper, who's now running for president, was our mayor at the very beginning of his mayorship. And then I left there and spent 5 years as superintendent in the Denver Public Schools, which is a district that 15 years ago was had lower student achievement growth than any district in the state of Colorado of any size. The last 3 years, they just did a study, Stanford University just did a study that came out 2 weeks ago that said that the kids in Denver were now growing so much faster than the kids in the rest of the state that it was as if we were adding 30 additional days onto our school year. So we have a 181-day school year. That's a pretty massive difference between what's going on in the other districts and ours. I still am a big, I still worry every day about the fact that our achievement gaps are as big as they are, and I worry every day, as I'm sure you guys do, about the fact that kids that are not going off to college, which is 70% of the kids that are coming out of a school district like Denver and other districts across the country, that we don't have a system set up in place beyond what you guys are doing, really, to give them a shot at earning anything other than a minimum wage. And if you're earning a minimum wage from the very beginning, it's very hard for you to ever catch up. I spent the last couple of years kind of writing a book about, not about me, but about the democracy. I gave it to the Senator. I only gave it to him yesterday because he gave me his book. And I said, well, I have to give you mine. I would never impose on anybody with it. But my conclusion, oh, did you? My conclusion was that if we spend another 10 years like we spent the last 10 years, we really are going to be the first generation of Americans to leave less opportunity and not more to the people coming after us. At 40 years of a lack of economic mobility, an education system that today is reinforcing the income inequality that we have rather than liberating people from it, and a political system in D.C. that's become so toxic and so broken and so corrupted. I mean, I obviously would never have wanted Donald Trump to be president, but I think he's much more a symptom of our problems than he is the cause of most of the problems that we face. And so the object for me is to think about not just how we beat him, but how we begin to govern the country again, because if we can't figure out how to do that, China's going to continue to rise, and they're offering something completely different from what we're offering. They're offering a surveillance state. They poured, in 3 years in the last decade, they poured more concrete than we poured in the 20th century. And while we spent 7 months here occupied with Donald Trump's $6 billion for his wall that Mexico was supposed to pay for every night, night after night, every day in the Senate, the Chinese were building 3,500 miles of fiber optic cable from South America to Africa, to connecting it again with China. So we are sort of out of the game right now, I think, in many ways, including investing in infrastructure in our own country, much less what needs to happen around the world. So I decided to run for that reason, just because I thought that the other candidates didn't have the same diagnosis that I had, that the system really does need to be overhauled for us to be able to make the decisions we need to make. I got in a little bit later because I had a health issue with prostate cancer, which I dealt with, which was a reminder why we should have universal health care in this country. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm a little bit behind the other candidates as a result of all that, but for me it's just one foot in front of the other, and we'll see what happens. And the reason I want to get together today with you guys is just to hear how things are going. Bill, it's Bill, right?
Yeah.
You said
Yeah.
things are going really well, which is true, I think, for a lot of trades around the country. I would love to hear about that. I'd love to hear about what you're thinking about. Happy to take any questions or comments or criticisms that anybody has about any topic, and I just thank you for making some time in the middle of the day.
Well, from a construction standpoint, I don't think there's anything bigger than infrastructure. I feel like we're living in a third world country on the side of Cedar Rapids. And it took us forever to get past the DSL phone line into our own building, you know? I'm serious.
I believe it.
It's terrible. But we look at the bridges, we look at the water, we look at the flood control stuff that we need to do. There's so much infrastructure here that you couldn't touch it in a 20-year cycle. There's just too much work to do.
Mhm.
But we're not doing any of it. We're not doing any of that work right now. So that's a big concern for
Yes.
us. For me, you know. That's it. That's my concern. And you can do anything else you want. The fact that I think that our senator from the Carolinas showed me today that he is absolutely bothered with Barrow Lindsey Graham's comments on.
Unbelievable.
I don't know if you saw his response to Trump's ridiculous.
I saw it.
He absolutely came out and showed that he's bothered.
Yeah.
There's nobody lower in the Senate that holds
Yeah.
right on
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
I'm glad he's not come on.
It was deeply, deeply disappointing to me. I
Disgusting.
got to know him because I was part of the Gang of Eight in 2013 that wrote the immigration bill in the Senate. He was one of the 4 Republicans, and I was one of the 4 Democrats. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think that's the building and trades that Bill's touching on. I think, my name's Rick, I'm with Hawkeye Area Labor Council. We're an umbrella organization for every union sector that is out there. So the industrial unions, and you can back me up on this, Tom, because you're from
Industrial, yeah.
the industrial unions, I think that right now, given the fact of what's going on in the country with trade, the amount of industrial jobs that we've lost over the past, how many years now, I think that's going to be a major concern for industrial union members and non-union members. Anybody that's in manufacturing in this country has lived in fear from day to day of having a job for a long time now. So, if you have any ideas or any policy that you have that you can send us as far as what your fix is to that, and not necessarily Trump's idea of trade wars.
Right.
I'm not sure that helps anybody, but, so if there's any policy that you have or any plans that you have, ideas, we'd really like to.
I could send you some stuff, and I
To
could
have
also
that.
just say some things.
Sure.
that
Yep.
help. If you look at our competitive advantages with respect to China on manufacturing, we have some. Their price of labor is going up. Their cost of energy is going up. Our cost of energy is pretty cheap compared to the rest of the world. And the risk of IP theft in China is so high that I think there is an opportunity to sort of add all that stuff up and believe that it's plausible that we could start to onshore manufacturing jobs again. You see GE, for example, opening up hot water heater plants in Kentucky that where they walked in 20 years after the last oven went out through there, and the oven doors are still hanging at the top of it, but they realized that the advantages that we had were just enough to make it competitive to do it here again. I think that I think that we can push on those advantages, especially energy, to drive a recovery of some of those industrial manufacturing jobs. We also still have a lot of advanced manufacturing in this country that we need to be careful that we don't lose the same way we lost the other manufacturing jobs that we had here. And I think investing in infrastructure is a big part of that, so that and infrastructure and R&D. Today, this year is the first time in our history that China's investment in R&D is actually greater than ours, not per capita, but the absolute amount. For them to cross us on that investment in R&D, on research and development, that line looks like this over the last 10 or 15 years, and ours has been flatter down. We've cut our investments in infrastructure and R&D and education by 35% since Reagan was president, and we've never caught up to it again. So you got to have an environment that supports these industries, and I think that we can do it if we're focused on it. I think Donald Trump's tariffs aren't going to work, even from the vantage point of the manufacturing sector, because essentially it's a tax on our producers and our workers. And the minute the tariffs come off, if the business wasn't sustainable before, it's not going to be sustainable after the tariffs come off. So I also think the Chinese were in the one thing I would say about Trump is that I think he was right to call out the Chinese. I just think he did it in a self-destructive way for the country, because we didn't have to do it by putting tariffs on them, and we didn't have to do it by putting tariffs on our closest trading partners. If we were able to take, and this would help us on manufacturing as well, if we were able to take the entire world that has the same set of equities we have with respect to China on trade, which is the whole world. So it's Europe, they have the same exact position that we are with respect to China. Canada, which has the same position that we're in. Africa, weirdly, and Asia, where in Asia, they don't have any desire to be dominated by China. They don't want to be dominated by us either. In their perfect world, you got a bipolar world where you've got, China and the United States kind of balanced off against each other. There's no reason why we can't lead a coalition of those countries to push back on China's mercantilist trade process and say no, which we've never done. I mean, since the day that China went into the WTO in the early 80s, we've never really pushed back on them until what Donald Trump has done here. The only countries that don't agree with us on this really are North Korea, Russia, and China. So I think there's a lot of room for us to run there. The other, I'd say finally that we have to do a much better job of preparing people in this country to do the work that we need them to do in the 21st century so they can actually get paid. That has a lot of implications for what our high school curriculum looks like and what our community college curriculum looks like and how we can build on the successes that you guys have had without eroding them in terms of apprenticeships and other kinds of models that people
Which
offer.
seems to me the next model is to erode the
Yeah,
apprenticeships
we
that have been
shouldn't.
working for 100 years.
Yeah, no, we shouldn't do that.
What about my biggest concerns being from, I'm IBW Manufacturing, we represent workers at Collins Aerospace, to defense contractor. One of my biggest concerns in the organizing aspect for industrial unions, the NLRB is garbage right now, has been. We need to reverse a bunch of that. In the late 90s, early 2000s, we had what we called an Employee Free Choice Act that was going around, could never get it through. The Obama administration started some of those policies, and of course they got stripped back when our Nazi friend took over. So those are some issues that we see in manufacturing for organizing. That would also help in the service industry. And I think unionizing more of the workforce will create a stronger America and probably a much better solution for Democrats in general. I mean, that's where we're at. So
I agree. I don't know if you saw the latest ruling today. I just saw it as I was walking in here. Is it the DC Circuit Court, was it? Basically, in upholding a bunch of stuff that the Trump administration has done to make it harder for workers to unionize public sector unions and also to make it easier for them to be fired. So this is a long-term game these guys have been a part of. You have sat in the middle of it in Iowa. I mean, I don't need to tell you what it looks like, and it's not just about the federal government, it's about states as well. And it's public and private, employers and sectors. And I think you also raised a really important point on the service sector. A lot of these jobs that are the lowest wage jobs in the country are the ones that are least capable of exporting overseas. Healthcare jobs, long-term care jobs, the people that take care of our parents and our grandparents, or our children for that matter. Those jobs are paid nowhere near what they should be paid, and I think that efforts to unionize there by SCIU and others are ones that we need to really support because, it goes right to the heart of what kind of country we want to live in. In my state, which has one of the best economies in America, the vast majority of people I meet cannot afford some combination of housing, healthcare, higher education, and early childhood education, which means they can't afford a middle-class life, and the folks that I used to work for in my old school district who don't come to my town hall meetings because they're working 2 jobs or maybe even 3 jobs, no matter how hard they work, they feel like they can't get out of poverty. So these structural issues in our economy where you've got, for basically the last 40 years, every time the economy has grown, the bottom 90% of Americans have seen no wage growth, and all of it has been captured by the people at the very top over and over and over again. And sometimes what people say is that's the natural effect of a worldwide price for labor, that's the effect of technology, that's the effect of China rising. I think the American people know we haven't tried very hard to deal with that, and I've got a list of like 15 things that I wrote in the book that I gave you, one of which is strengthening our union so that we have a much better opportunity for people to be able to organize and collectively bargain. We've got the PRO Act in the Senate, which I know you guys are probably familiar with, that every Democrat has signed on to. But there's no.
I'm not familiar with it. What is that?
It's a bill that would make it easier for guys to collectively bargain and harder for employers to kind of slow down the efforts by union organizers.
So it's a collective bargaining.
It's the protecting, what is it?
Protecting the right to organize.
The protecting the right to organize. So that's sort of our major initiative right now there.
And things like that are going to have to be enshrined, encapsulated in the laws because the labor board overturns everything.
Which is, exactly. And you mentioned the NLRB too. I mean, obviously, that's another place where we have to, that's another reason why we need not just the president, but we got to win the Senate back too. And
We're seeing effects of it here we're in the 18th district or 18th region. We're seeing effects.
what do you tell me what you're
locally.
seeing?
I filed a board charge, which was essentially a no-brainer. The company said that, oh, that's not how we read the contract language, and the regional director came back and said, well, if there's 2 legitimate ways that the contract can be interpreted, that's the right word, that they are going to defer it to the grievance process. And how do you how can you otherwise interpret a will or a shall other than will or shall?
And they were saying it was may.
The company was saying it was may.
Yeah.
So the regional director, walked away without the board charge. I'm not saying it's totally Trump related, but we are in a situation where these guys are all appointed by him, and it's having, and these are effects, I'm trying to bring up issues that maybe some of your other folks aren't.
No, yeah, I appreciate it.
Aren't, because this isn't something, run-of-the-mill folks are seeing, but this is going to affect organizing campaigns, folks in factories, work sites, wherever, that want to organize into industrial service or even federal government sector type organizing campaigns. This is all going to create that, and we are going to be in a position where the folks that are educating the public, other than the Koch brothers and their money, are unions. And we don't have the money to do it through TV ads. We do it through organizing new members and educating them to educate their families and friends. And that's how we do things, and that's how we've done things forever. And if every time we try to organize a new site, we're going to get a shitty decision off the NLRB, it's just going to be another door slamming in our face. So, I mean, it's...
How are your organizing efforts going?
They're tough. I mean, companies for years have been able to basically fire folks for for supporting unions without, those are the type of charges that are gonna get leveled up through the NLRB, because someone who gets fired for no other reason than supporting a union in an organizing drive is gonna file a board charge, and it's going to be the guy that's in charge of Region 18 or wherever you're at is appointed by Donald Trump, who has no respect for anybody who makes less than, or anybody who pays taxes. I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare very good.
I believe,
Oh, that's pretty
This is
good.
the longest I've ranted without swearing, by the way.
Actually, you
You did
did
swear.
swear.
Did I? Okay.
Wait, no, you did.
That was like morning
You did,
prayer with
yeah.
him. You have to know him to really appreciate it.
So these are issues that you're not gonna get from other folks.
Yeah. Just
You
to
know.
overlay one other
Yeah.
point too, because of what we've done to the confirmation process for judges back there.
Yeah.
You know, now Donald Trump's had more judges appointed than any other president in our history, and that, you know, all day long, that's what we're doing, all week long. That's what and now that McConnell has invoked the nuclear option on the timing, so that now it's not 30 hours, it's 2 hours. It's just it's an assembly, a conveyor belt, I guess is the way to think about it. And that's gonna have real implications for
For the
all
next
of
30
it.
or 40
Yeah.
years.
and to touch on another matter with the NLRB, I believe that now companies are going to potentially have the ability,
Yes.
employers are going to now have the ability to call for decertification of a union, whereas previously it had to go through petition, you had to get enough signatures, you'd go to a vote. The employees had to call for a decertification vote. Well, NLRB new ruling states that the companies can do that as long as they file for it 90 days, I believe, is the number.
60.
I thought it was 90, but, so 60
Either
or
way,
90.
it's not enough.
60 or 90 days before the collective bargaining agreement is over, then they can call for the decertification vote, and it's my understanding the only thing that they need to do this is to say, well, we don't believe that over 50% of our workforce supports this bargaining agent. So that's big in the aspect that, yeah, they may not be able to eliminate a lot of collective bargaining agreements or unions who are representing these employees, but what they will be able to do via this is, you know damn well that the unions are going to have to pay for these recertification votes. They're going to have to pay money to go through the process. And that's where it's going to start to get expensive and hairy. So it's just another, there's a whole list of them.
I have 93% in my factory, in our factory right now, and the company knows that because we have dues checkoff. But do you think in 3 years, when we have to renegotiate with them a new contract, they're not gonna call for that vote, which is gonna take up our resources to go out and make sure everybody's gonna vote? It's total garbage. It's
It's similar to what the Iowa Republicans have been doing in
Yes,
our state collective bargaining.
everything
Public
about
sector.
Republicans and unions is if, they'll tell everybody they know how ineffective unions are, but then they'll spend every dime they have to give it to us where we don't want it. So,
I've gotten rolling kind of there.
Yeah, that was
This is
good.
my
What
boss
about,
is-
I'll get him started.
my
What
boss
about-
is,
tell-
yeah, my boss, you can tell her.
What about the implications of all this for your membership, for, you know, the way people are thinking about this president versus a Democratic president versus, because I know there's, you know, I know there are huge divisions of opinion about this stuff.
I would tell you from our standpoint, we're pressing one thing, and I'm telling all my members to go see everybody they can see, learn everything they can about everybody. Because on the tail end of this, only one's gonna come out the other side.
Right.
And I'm already sick of hearing somebody that I'm a Bernie supporter. If it's not Bernie, I'll sit this one out too. And my response is a single gesture to them, because you have to learn everything, and we can't do this for one more president. We can't do 4 more years. We'll be
Right.
lucky to be here 2 years from now,
Yep.
let alone 6.
Yep.
So we're telling our members, you meet everybody, you listen to everybody, you talk, you ask questions, because only one person's coming out the other side of this process, and you've got to know what they are. And so unions, a lot of union talk for us, a lot.
I think there's definitely a lot of buyer's remorse within the ironworkers here. I know like our internal pollster said something like between 36 and 40% voted for Trump. And now we hear, I mean, even from the diehard ones that, were very vocal about it, they said, man, we really screwed up.
And what do you think their remorse is, or, regret is?
I think they're seeing the attacks on their union, on their livelihood,
Yeah.
from NLRB appointments. Now with this new IRAP, which is the industry recognized apprenticeship program, with trying to take the construction industry out of that, or try to remove the exemption for the construction industry. They can all see that it's so basically currently the Department of Labor accredits apprenticeships, and there's all sorts of standards that you have to go through. A certain amount of classroom hours, on-job training, like ratios of journeymen to apprentices. Again, this is for the construction industry, and so the construction industry used to be exempt from that, and now they're trying to make it non-exempt. So any guy with a pickup truck and a ladder can basically say, this is my company, this is my apprentice, I have an apprenticeship, so now I can bid on schools, hospitals, airports, power plants. And so then the next logical step in their attack will be prevailing wage.
That was, I think, a focus for Acosta, who's the guy that's now gone.
Right, yeah. So our international has now told us to start preparing for prevailing wage attacks too, now that Acosta's gone.
And now that Acosta's gone, he's managed to find somebody who might potentially be even worse.
Who is it? I haven't
Yeah, it's
seen.
just hard to imagine.
What's his name?
I just started again.
Pete
this
Selby?
morning. Yeah. He's one that has sweatshops or
Yeah.
promoted sweatshops as a way to do business. Yes, that's the new,
If you can, if you need to appoint somebody to something, the person that like Rob Hogue here would envision in that role, you take that person and the exact opposite. The exact opposite. It's like environmental protection, okay, who owns waste management? Let's do them.
No, it's true. It's true. It's absolutely
I
true.
mean-
When you think about, we used to play a game in my house with the kids called Opposite Day, where like you could wear your pajamas for dinner or whatever. And that's what his foreign policy is the same thing. It's the opposite of what you would want to do, you would want anybody to do, or what any other president would have done.
Yes.
Is what he does.
labor, environment, take them all.
Yeah.
And yet, some of his core supporters saying that's why we elected him, tear it all down.
The
right?
sheeple.
Yeah.
We call them sheeple.
Yeah.
I want to make a couple points. Bill talked about, we've got a lot of infrastructure projects that need to be done. If you get a chance today, or if you get a chance and you're driving through downtown Cedar Rapids, you'll see where we're in the middle of constructing what will be a $750 million flood protection system that is 11 years after our flood and only 18% federally funded. Generation ago, Dubuque built a flood wall, 95% federally funded.
Right.
So we're doing it with property taxes, and thanks to
Bonds.
thanks to an objectively good job by a certain state senator, $264 million federal in state money, right? So we've got state money and local money,
But are you financing it too, or is it?
they are. I don't know where the city is on that. We just authorized them to do 30-year bonds in the legislature rather than 20 if they wanted to, and they might. But the point is, that's all going to be backed up by property tax, local dollars. But we've got a lot of infrastructure needs. You are either on the way in or hopefully on the way out. You'll see that this is my favorite solar-powered union hall in the state. We need to do better organizing our clean energy industries.
That's
We do have one company here locally that is labor union, uses union labor on solar projects. SiteGen Solar, run by former Democratic State Representative Tyler Olson. And that his company has always used union labor, his family's company. But we do need to do a better job of that.
I was told that there was not a single wind project in Illinois that was not union. In other words, or put another way, every single wind project in
Is
Illinois
union.
has been a union.
That may
project.
be. Iron Workers Local 89 they, maybe 9 years ago, they invited me to go up to Delaware County to see the Greeley Wind Project, first major wind project in northeast Iowa. IBEW Local 89 was helping build the towers. And I remember a guy telling me it was the best project he'd ever worked on, because it was using union labor and American-made
steel.
They weren't, unfortunately, they weren't Iowa-made turbines, but they were coming out of Arkansas. They were so American-made.
It's amazing when you get the wind towers. When we worked on them up in Minnesota, the towers were made in North Dakota and some in Canada. The transformers were all made in Arkansas. The bases were all made here. I mean, except for the actual inverters, virtually every part of that tower was made in the United States.
We got a bunch of that in Colorado, and and it is, it's the turbines themselves, but then the supply chain is so important, hugely
Blade
important.
plants in Iowa.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's a huge, why there's not a solar thermal in Iowa that turning out solar panels is beyond me, because that's an industry where it's almost, you can do it automated.
We should be making them all here.
Yeah.
The clean energy, the fuel efficient vehicles, the clean energy vehicles, we got to be working on making all those here. And I mean, we need an industrial policy as a country
Yeah.
that says, these are things we need to make here.
These are
right?
things that the industrial unions are
And-
excited to work hand in hand with government to bring these, like they've done with the transit stuff in Chicago.
And politically, yes,
Yeah.
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 Illinois has done a great job with rail and developing rail lines, but, you think about the states that this affects.
Are you talking about manufacturing the rail and manufacturing?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
The new trains, the cars.
Make them here,
Yeah.
make them here.
In
And
Chicago.
all of these things we're talking about right now are particularly important in Iowa,
Iowa.
Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan,
Colorado.
Ohio,
Could be Colorado.
could be Colorado.
Part of it.
They have other interests out there, but
That's true, we've been good at that.
Yeah.
everybody's got to get it.
So these are all jobs, and that, it's gonna push the economies.
Yeah, well, and to go
For
back
everybody.
to Bill's point about infrastructure on top of this, if you look at, since 2001, we've cut taxes by $5 trillion. Almost all of that has gone to the wealthiest people in the country. So you're looking at a country where we've got massive income inequality, and what we said is we're going to use our tax policy to actually make that worse. We didn't even spend that money. I mean, that's the wrong way of saying it. We borrowed $5 trillion, or sold $5 trillion of debt to the Chinese that our kids are going to have to repay for the privilege of giving the wealthiest people tax cuts. There was a mayor in Indiana, not Mayor Pete, but a different mayor, who wrote an op-ed about that when the Trump tax thing was going through, and he said, this is the equivalent, if I went out in my town and I borrowed more money than we'd ever borrowed before, and I used it not to build infrastructure, not to deal with floods, but instead to give it to one neighborhood of wealthy people in my community, that's the equivalent of this, and it is the equivalent of that. And then on top of that, we spent $5.6 trillion in the Middle East, so that's, and Trump says it's $7 trillion, so that's 11, 12, 13 trillion dollars that from the point of, I mean, literally, we could have fixed every bridge and every road and every port and we could have built broadband and connectivity to every rural county in America that doesn't have it. We could have shored up Social Security. And the list is like this long. That's how big the numbers are. And that's, got to be, I think, a big part of what the change is here, reestablishing a set of priorities where we're actually investing here.
I do think you need to be proactive on the immigration issue. We know it's coming, right? You know what Trump's going to
Yeah.
say, right? He's
Yeah.
been saying it. Last election, one of the reasons Fred Hubble lost was really mean, ugly ads right at the end, targeted in northwest Iowa, saying that Fred Hubble would not send the Iowa National Guard to defend our border against hordes coming from Mexico.
Yeah.
Right, so we know it's coming. I think the way you got to beat that is to do things that are as proactive and show, here's how Democrats want to fix immigration, and you're well positioned for that, being on the Gang of Eight.
Yeah, and that Gang of Eight bill, I mean, we had Trump doesn't remember this, but we had $46 billion of border security in that bill. 46 billion. He's talking about 6 billion that he can't cobble together. He's trying to steal it from the Defense Department because he couldn't even get the Republicans to agree. But we had 350 miles of border fence, what he calls steel slats now. 350 miles. We had a whole bunch of technology that we developed in Afghanistan and Iraq that would allow us to see every inch of the border. We doubled the number of border security agents on the border. We had the internal security, where 40% of the people that are here that are undocumented are people that came lawfully and overstayed their visas. We have no capacity for figuring that out. We put the E-Verify stuff, which has turned...
It'd be law of the land now if that...
It would, and it would be, and this would all be a moot point on some point.
So you get to the fact that there is somebody lower than Lindsey Graham, and it's Mitch McConnell. Why aren't these bills coming out?
Yeah.
Why aren't they being debated? Why aren't we sent back? I mean...
That one is because it went over to the House with 68 votes, and Boehner, who I actually sort of like, couldn't overcome the Freedom Caucus, and those 40 guys, and then Paul Ryan couldn't either. He wouldn't let himself do it.
Now they won't send it because it might...
Yeah, and that's 40 guys who basically tyrannized the rest of us for the last 10 years and immobilized the federal government. And that is what we really have to change if we're going to deal with any of this stuff. And sorry to keep going, but I'd say one. And by the way, that's why we have to be able to win Senate seats in Colorado and Iowa and Arizona and New Hampshire.
I know you got a good candidate against Cory Gardner.
And we need to, we will, and we need to pay attention to what our politics is. Because if we disqualify ourselves by looking like somehow the party doesn't understand that our border needs to be secured, that's, what he's going to say.
The narrative needs to change. These aren't immigrants, these are refugees.
Absolutely right.
Refugees is the word. And
Yeah.
when we use immigrants, people think of people that climbed over a wall to come here and be
Yeah.
your maid.
Yeah.
And these are refugees that are looking
Right.
for asylum. That's the narrative.
And there is a distinction between, the immigration work that we did in 2013
Right.
and this refugee issue now that we need to be confronting.
Well, the other thing your bill did, this is, okay, so border security, I think Democrats support it, but it's got to be part of comprehensive immigration reform to actually fix the problem.
Right.
And that bill would have would have fixed some of the things to provide the immigration that we need. The bill also contemplated that refugees would be entitled to their rights.
It also had a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people that are here
the
that are
Dream
undocumented.
situation.
Dream
You
Act.
got it, fix it comprehensively. And I think, I personally think we need to use that a little more aggressively against Trump and the Republicans. We've got a U.S. Senate race here in 2020, and I'm hoping our candidates will point out that Joni Ernst has been in the United States Senate for 5 or 6 years, depending on when they're talking, and she hasn't passed a single darn thing to fix immigration, because she hasn't, right? And I think they should use that offensively against her.
They've only made matters worse. It's the same
Yeah.
thing with healthcare. He said, everybody's gonna get healthcare, you're all gonna love it, it's gonna be a lot cheaper, and all he's done is take it away from millions of people. And today, even right now, what they're trying to do is take it away from people that have pre-existing conditions. But we have to, I don't think anybody has a sense, I shouldn't say anybody, but I think that there's not a strong sense of what the National Democratic Party stands for.
There's no identity there. There's
No
identity
identity.
as a party.
And that's why, one of the reasons why Trump was able to fill the vacuum that he did.
Getting the 8 bill, how many good union jobs would have been created from that bill, do you know?
I don't know, it would have.
Because they had construction, they had-
Oh, yeah, it would have increased GDP by 2 percentage points over 10 years and increased it by 5 percentage points over 20 years. That's a massive increase to our economic growth and viability. By the way, it's the largest deficit reduction bill that I've worked on in the time that I've been in the Senate. A lot of virtue in that.
Senator Bennet, you're kind of getting the signal.
Oh, no.
Well,
You're okay?
is there anything else?
A few more minutes.
See, the magic signals, when Senator Harkin was doing his farewell tour, he came out and said goodbye to the IBW in D.C., And his poor staffer said,
They would never.
Senator, we have to leave. We surrounded by 4,000 electricians, all wanting to shake his hand. And after about the third time, she came over and said, can you get him out of here? And I said, sure. I said, Senator, it's time to leave. And he said, all right, just a moment. 5 minutes later, she goes, we really got to go. So I went over and I said, Senator Harkin, I'm told that if you don't leave now, I'm going to pick you up, put you over my shoulder, and carry you up the escalator. Well, we got to go. And off he went. He was more afraid of being carried out of there than he was of anything else. So.
Yeah.
So when you give that signal, I'll pick him up and carry him out.
He was on the, he was still chairman of his committee when I got there, and I was, you know.
He was actually, I believe, going to run the Employee Free Choice Act that he stepped aside for the.
Before that,
Yeah.
That was his next.
So Trump won rural America. And, you know, this is, since 2016, the Democratic Party and well, even Labor, you know, we've had major discussions about how do we reach rural America again? How do we let rural America know that we're on their side, whether it's Labor, whether it's a Democrat? Pro-working family candidates, how do you pull that off? How do you do that? I mean, is there a plan for your campaign to reach rural America? Because
yeah.
without reaching them, the same thing could happen
No,
again.
it easily could. I mean, a lot of these rural areas, you won't win, but you can't lose by 1 billion in these places. And I've spent 10 years in Colorado on the ag committee. I've been on the ag committee in Washington, which has given me a reason to be in rural Colorado the whole time that I've been there. And the immigration bill that you were talking about, before I worked on the Gang of Eight, I went out and created this thing called the Colorado Compact, which was a set of principles on immigration. I didn't create it, but I worked with a bunch of people to do it. And some of the most conservative organizations in the state that represent those rural counties that you're talking about were the first signatories on the principles. Because the farmers and ranchers in Colorado, the dairy guys in Colorado, they know they're gonna, if they don't solve the labor issue for themselves, they're gonna have a huge problem passing their business along to the people that are coming after us. And so when I got back to Washington, I was working on the Gang of Eight, I could say, look, I don't know what's wrong with Washington, you guys here, but there is a bipartisan consensus back there that we ought to be doing something. My climate plan is written to try to build a coalition of rural and urban around climate. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday, Bob and I did, but it imagines that we can figure out a way over time to use farming practices to sequester carbon in the soil and maybe ultimately pay people to do that. That could build a rural coalition. The reason I wrote it that way is to try to cut through the division that exists. My healthcare plan, I'd be interested to hear you guys on this actually before they pull me out, because I strongly believe we have to get to universal healthcare in this country, but I deeply believe that the way to do that is with a public option, not with Medicare for all that takes away 180 million people's healthcare in the country. My version of that, Medicare X is the name of it, starts in rural America, so that that's the first place it goes, and then over 3 years it works out, it goes to everybody in America who wants to have it, who would like to have a public option for their families. And the reason I started there was 10 years ago during the Affordable Care Act, when I was on the Eastern Plains of Colorado, which is rural Colorado, explaining my vote for the Affordable Care Act. It was not an easy thing. People were not happy that I voted that way. I felt the need in the August recess to be there to explain it, so at least people understood it. Whereas back then, people might have said, we don't want we're not interested in your Bolshevik project here, your socialist project. Now they're saying thank you, for thinking about us, because nobody's thinking about us, because they have seen what's happened, the threat to their rural hospitals because of cuts to Medicaid, the fact that families, all these families in America that aren't poor enough to be on Medicaid but aren't making enough money to actually have health insurance, a lot of those people are in rural areas. I'll give you one example of that. It's in a county called Jackson County, tiny county in my state, massive in size, very few people, 1,000 people live in the county. And during the course of the conversation, it became clear that virtually nobody in the room had health insurance. The school principal got it from the schools. The county commissioner got it because he was now elected county commissioner. He hadn't had it before. Then there was one other person who had it. There's a guy there who owned the restaurant, and he and his wife were working 50 hours a week. He said, I bought this restaurant, came back because I wanted to be where I had grown up, bought the restaurant, had a bowling alley, and he said, I have two slots I could hire for, but I can't hire anybody. And I said, why can't you hire anybody? And he said, well, because they'll have to give up their welfare to come work here. And I said, what do you mean by their welfare? And he said, their Medicaid, meaning their health care. So here you have a situation where I'm sure there are two people there who would want to work if they didn't lose their health care as a result. And the guy who's running the business and his wife don't have health insurance, even though they're working a combined 100 hours a week. That's the kind of stuff where I think we just can't accept the places where McConnell is drawing the line. We need a president who can go to rural America and say, this is what I'm trying to do. Here's why the tax bill looks better than what Trump's tax bill looks like. Farmers are smart. They can do the math, of this stuff. And I think you'd need to invite the Fox guys to come with you and say, bring your calculators, because the lies that you've been telling we're now going to expose, which I think is what we need to do. So I don't believe, there are people, there are Democrats who believe that this is all about galvanizing our base. I don't believe that. I believe there's no way we're going to out-galvanize our base compared to his base. We need a politics that actually unifies people across these lines in order to beat him, because I agree with what?
Find who you are.
Yeah, and I agree with you that I think we can't survive another 4 years. Like, I literally believe that the kids, who are getting lousy educations all over America, got another 10 years of this, and this country is going to be a country of a very few haves and a lot of other people.
I was ready to coast out until I had grandkids. Now it pisses me off because I got to worry about them for the next 65
Right.
years. I was
Yeah.
ready to go kayaking and disappear off the face of the
Thank you,
earth.
thank you, Bill, for your.
Yeah, well, it
dedication.
pissed me off. But anyway,
But that's how you evaluate it, though. It's, I assume you guys like whatever healthcare plan
He
is.
gave me one of
you
these,
have.
that means I'm going to carry out.
Okay,
So,
finish
you
this
know,
point.
I-
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah, no, please do.
Sorry.
No, I appreciate it, because
Do you have good health? I mean,
so we're self-insured.
Yeah.
And we haven't had a rate increase for 7 years now. We are fully ACA compliant from the beginning, not what it's marked into. Our family premiums cost us $940 a month for a $500 deductible plan with dental, vision, prescription drugs. We've got everything. It's possible to do it. And we're run by 3 stupid-ass electricians and 3 contractors who don't get along.
That may be,
You know?
that may be the
Still get
reason.
this done,
That may
you
be
know?
the reason why it works.
But it does.
Yeah.
And, you're covered the day you marry a member, you're covered the day you work 300 hours, your kids are covered the day they were born, your adopted kid. We cover everybody up to 20, the whole 9 yards, and it costs us $940 a month.
Yeah.
And we talk to these people coming in that it's hard to organize because it takes them 300 hours to qualify for ours, 2 months. But they're paying $1,400, $1,500 a month for their policy.
That's almost exactly what the cost of my Medicare X would be. So it's roughly about $900.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's insane, but we can't organize people in because they're going to go 3 months without health insurance. We can't pick them up from day one. We have our own rules.
Right.
But they're paying $1,500 a month.
Or yeah.
It's insane. Ours are family
Yeah.
plans, they're all family plans.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's insane. to
Yeah,
do
that's a
that. So we
family of
can't do
4,
something.
it's 75,000 or 100,000.
If you make $100,000 under Medicare, your premiums will be cut in half to $750 per month.
750. I mean, and this is a classic case, because this is just effed up politics in Washington DC. They can't get it done. I mean, there's no rocket science to it.
Well, we looked around at each other and said, our plan wasn't ACA compliant, but we were
At the-
grandfathered in. And we just looked around and said, what, we like what the ACA said, so we just said we give up our grandfather status, we're in.
Yeah.
And you didn't hear any complaints from any members
Yeah.
that said, we're in. Period.
All right. I hope you let me stay in touch. Thanks for coming by. I owe everybody an hour, so let me know how you want to use it sometime. Take you to the amusement park.